Ocarina of Time has turned 20 years old, and since we have no remake or announcement of a Nintendo 64 Classic port, we decided to go over what is next for the franchise after our times with Breath of the Wild.
Ocarina of Time changed the Zelda franchise, set the conventions for 3D Zelda, and brought it into a new age. That gameplay-wise and timeline-wise lasted until Breath of the Wild. And while it is important to honor Ocarina on an upload date like this, we believe that the Zelda franchise, after 20 years of being stuck in one game's shadow, is finally being shaped from the ground up. On to the topic at hand. After Breath of the Wild, there are a few ways to go for the franchise on the Nintendo Switch. But first we need to realize one thing. Breath of the Wild was delayed multiple times in multiple years, and these delays had an impact on when we can expect the next Zelda game to hit the Nintendo Switch. So before we get into deep waters, here are some initial facts as to where we stand.
The Zelda team began development on the next big open-air Zelda title for the Nintendo Switch around December 2017. So let's assume that they are around 1 year into development of the game. A sign of the progression of the title and that something is on the move is that Nintendo recently listed 2 job postings, one for a 3D computer graphics designer and the other for a level designer. So can we hope for a mainline Zelda in 2019 or 2020? Or will we have to wait 4 years until 2021 or at worst 2022? If we are following Breath of the Wild's development cycle of 5 years, the latter one might be more realistic. But we can always hope, right? The first and most awaited possibility, with the exception of a smartphone Zelda, is that 2 years after Breath of the Wild, one of the Zelda teams will deliver another top-down Zelda experience, but this time in 3D and with HD visuals. That's right, the traditional 2D Zelda. And this is where we have to set the tone. If we are to get any sort of mainline or canon Zelda title in 2019, then it will most likely be a top-down Zelda.
The reason for this assumption is that the Nintendo Switch will be the host for this genre of the franchise from this point onward. Seeing that, the Zelda team and their partners might in 2019 go down the path of Pokemon Let's Go in 2018. That was a mid-game before bringing another open-air experience. As they did in Pokemon Let's Go, they brought an established handheld formula, top-down Pokemon, turned it as much as possible into 3D, and gave it an HD polish. This approach will as well work for Zelda, and following a 3D open-air Zelda, it's time for a top-down 3D Zelda. And since this will not be as massive of a project, it could already be in the work and drop even in 2019 following a March Nintendo Direct or E3 reveal.
A likely candidate for a project like this would be the top-down Zelda team and Grezzo. The latter just finished work on Luigi's Mansion 3D, and as we know from their history of developing games, their team is perfectly capable of remaking one title while at the same time working on a brand new one. So could Grezzo work on a top-down Zelda or even a 3D game in the style of Ocarina of Time 3D and Majora's Mask 3D? This has been a long-rumored option, and we know that a traditional, non-open-air Zelda in the same style as Ocarina and Majora would be welcomed with open arms. So that leaves us with 2 options in 2019, seeing that the release of another open-air Zelda title is impossible in the span of 2 years. Majora was possible back in the day, but things have gotten awfully more complex over the last 2 decades. And you know what? This might be it, as we haven't had a new traditional linear and regular dungeon-based 3D Zelda game since Skyward Sword in 2011, unlike the top-down A Link Between Worlds in 2013. Now the big question is, has Nintendo abandoned the linear formula with traditional dungeons in favor of the open-air formula, or will the Zelda series now consist of 3 genres? That will be the Open Air Zelda, the 3D Linear Zelda, and Top-Down Zelda. This could be it, and if this turn has taken place following the launch of Breath of the Wild, then it wouldn't come as a surprise that prior to another top-down and open-air Zelda, we could see a linear 3D Zelda in the style of Ocarina and Majora's Mask. Perhaps a sequel following the two remakes explaining how the Hero of Time became the Hero's Shade, or a brand new Link. Only time will tell.
Even though we would love a mainline Zelda title in 2019, we need to be prepared that the already packed year of 2019 with Yoshi, Fire Emblem, Luigi's Mansion 3, Animal Crossing and obviously the core Pokemon Switch RPG might result in any potential top-down or traditional Zelda title being pushed to 2020. So 2020, if 2019 is likely out of the line, could this be the year we get a new top-down, 3D traditional or even a reusing assets open-air direct sequel or prequel to Breath of the Wild? Yes, likely one of those. Then the question is, which one? The honest answer? We don't know, as it heavily depends on what ambition or goals the Zelda team has following the landmark and Dragon Break title that Breath of the Wild was throughout 2017. Nevertheless, if the Zelda team focuses on only one project and want to reuse as much as possible of the assets from Breath of the Wild, similarly to what they did with Majora's Mask after Ocarina of Time, then it could be possible that we could get the next open-air Zelda title sometime in 2020. Well, it would probably require reusing the map of Hyrule, perhaps rebuilding the ruins, and perhaps add a dark world that mirrors Breath of the Wild's Hyrule. That way, they could create a game in the same world, but with new objectives and many more locations to explore. To give you a feeling of this option and why it will mark for a brand new experience of discovery, my second hometown of Warsaw was completely turned to rubble during World War II. Now imagine if I could go back from the Sea of Ruins of 1945 to 1938 and experience the city at its peak prior to its destruction.
That is the exploration potential we could be in for in Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, where Hyrule Castletown and all central settlements of the kingdom were turned into ruins by the calamity 100 years prior. A prequel set in a Hyrule in its heyday would be great. But you know what? The Zelda team could actually give us a game after Breath of the Wild, with all the ruined locations rebuilt and filled with people. And with that, side quests, stores, and many new activities. In other words, Breath of the Wild's post-apocalyptic world and ruins mark for great possibilities and many hours of gameplay if they were to rebuild. The world itself and the physics engine remains the same. You only use it in a different way and fill it with different content. Or they could reuse the assets and the physics engine in a different location. But knowing that engine, it would just have to be rebuilt like Breath of the Wild's Hyrule. The point is, an open-air Zelda title reusing assets could come at the peak of Nintendo Switch's popularity, but more on that in a second, as we cannot forget that 2020 will, if Nintendo doesn't come out with a Zelda title in 2019, almost certainly have some sort of mainline Zelda game. And then it will be over 3 years since Breath of the Wild first came out, and it will be time for another entry no matter what. So here's what we hope for, but also what we think will be the Zelda game in 2020. Obviously, we hope for another open-air adventure that reuses most of the assets and engine from Breath of the Wild. At the same time, we have to face the fact that the Zelda team headed by Mr. Eiji Aonuma and Mr. Hidemaru Fujibayashi are too ambitious to go for the easy option, instead of delivering a worthy Zelda Switch experience.
With this in mind, we believe that it's unlikely that we'll see a game like Breath of the Wild until the last 2 years of the Switch life cycle, say 2021 or 2022. Because of this commitment, we think that the next Zelda title in 2020 will either be a top-down adventure or a 3D adventure with a more traditional linear approach. Will this be a disappointment? No, as we are all aware that it will take time to develop a core Nintendo Switch open-air Zelda title. And this is what many of us tend to forget. Breath of the Wild was developed first for the Wii U in mind. The Nintendo Switch port did first come at a later stage in play, during the development process, but since the Switch allowed you to bring the grand adventure wherever you went, it became the superior one.
In other words, what the Zelda team is facing is to do to Zelda what Sakurai has done to Smash from 4 to Ultimate. elevate the series to a new level that the Wii U wouldn't allow, and take full advantage of the features that the Nintendo Switch offers. That being the Joy-Cons, the HD Rumble, motion controls, the IR camera for use in puzzles and gameplay, the increased power, the undocked aspect, etc, etc. The Zelda team is too ambitious to limit themselves to get a title done within the next 2 years, as remember, unlike the Nintendo 64, which got 2 titles on the same system, we are no longer on the Wii U. Instead, Aonuma and Fujibayashi will probably invest insane amounts, and then take time to learn how they can get the most out of Nintendo's most innovative piece of hardware to make an even better Zelda experience than Breath of the Wild. The Nintendo Switch offers a sea of undiscovered possibilities that could be just what the team needs to continue the evolution that Breath of the Wild set in motion.
Obviously, the development of a Zelda title that will take full advantage of the Nintendo Switch hardware and be as ambitious as Breath of the Wild will take several years to complete. And while this unknown Zelda Switch title is being put into place for around 2021, we should see other Zelda titles hit the systems in the meanwhile. These will most likely be the top-down or traditional linear 3D Zelda titles that we have been detailing in this video, and that could come sometime in 2020 in order to fill the gap until the true open-air Zelda Switch successor to Breath of the Wild is ready to be shown and eventually released. We also can't forget that in the Switch's lifecycle, beside new installments, we will likely get a Skyward Sword HD remaster. The obvious cause for a remake of this 3D Zelda title are the Joy-Cons and HD Rumble. And it wouldn't come as a surprise if Skyward Sword HD came out along with a Zelda HD collection including Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD, and Skyward Sword HD.
And there you have it. 2019 could surprise us, but most likely, new Zelda titles will once again be on the horizon in 2020 with a top-down or 3D traditional linear title, and then the next generation Zelda Switch game sometime in 2021 or 2022. That will say after Pokemon Switch and Metroid Prime 4, because the next open-air title has probably not been in development for more than a year. On this 20th anniversary of Ocarina, we can state that even though we all hope for another Majora scenario, there are really good reasons for why we haven't seen a 2-year Zelda development cycle since then. The main reason being that Majora was a result of a bet between series producer Mr. Eiji Aonuma and series creator Shigeru Miyamoto. Next, you have the complexity of Zelda nowadays. Reusing assets is possible, but it is more complicated when it comes to stuff like the sophisticated physics engine found in Breath of the Wild. However, we also think that the Zelda team has clear ideas of when it comes to where they want to bring the series next after Breath of the Wild. The process in itself is slow-paced, as it takes time to develop a well-polished experience that Zelda is renowned for delivering. So in other words, Zelda games, with the exception of Majora, have not been rushed. And with the first exclusive Zelda experience for Nintendo Switch, it might be time for a top-down or even 3D traditional experience in 2019 or 2020 before another open-air game in 2021 or at worst, 2022.
Luckily for you, this video marked the introduction to a new Zelda video series after Breath of the Wild on the channel, where we will go over different sides regarding the next entry in the series and what we can learn from Breath of the Wild in order to deliver an even more flawless experience with the first Switch exclusive Zelda title. On that note, make sure to like this video, and if you're new, subscribe to the Commonwealth Realm and press that notification bell to not miss any of our upcoming videos, including more Zelda videos. Finally, we want to thank all our great patrons for their support, and in particular royal producer Kenyatta Ali. We need more patrons that can support our upcoming Zelda productions on patreon.com/commonrealm, as we after Ocarina 20 now begin the countdown to Zelda 33.